Welcome to Talk to the Bot. This is a new podcast series, and I'm with Advitya Gemawat. He is a student I've known for many years and also met in Boston while I was visiting last year. Aditya, you've been doing pretty fascinating work, and to be recognized as someone who's an expert or budding expert in the field of data science, the 25 under 25. I'll leave the introductions to you, but also, emphasize a little bit about the work that you do at Microsoft in the AI development acceleration program and other things that you might be involved in. So go ahead, introduce yourself.
Sure, yeah. Thank you for having me. My name is Advitya. I had graduated from UC San Diego, majoring in data science in 2021. Since then, I have been working as a machine learning engineer at Microsoft in Cambridge, Massachusetts, which is in the Boston area. And I'm part of a machine learning rotation program where I get to work with four different orgs across Microsoft for 6 months each on different kinds of machine learning projects. And then I get to choose my permanent team. So I'm on my last rotation right now, and I've gotten to work on projects related to machine learning systems research, to AI for operations, to responsible AI. So getting to work with diverse kinds of ML challenges across the company is also like a pretty nice learning experience. Yeah.
The idea behind this podcast is so well suited to having you being featured in our first session. It's so kind of ever evolving sort of a landscape in terms of applications of AI. So for a layman, how would you describe the whole buzz around LLM and generative AI tools? What do you think futurists and even techies and even humanists and other people from different backgrounds could sort of watch out for or even use these tools for?
Mhm. Yeah. If I were to explain this in layman terms, right, I would probably say something like these are essentially systems, or I would say interfaces in a way, where you can speak in natural language. You can kind of communicate instructions in your everyday kind of conversational tone using the same kinds of words you might use while talking to a person. And the interface or the system would actually recognize the intent of what you're saying and actually get infer instructions from what you're saying and actually provide a response that would try to simulate what a human might actually tell you in response to your question or to your prompt. Um, and for the second part of your question related to where this could go in the future, these are obviously very early days. But the way I kind of see this initially evolving is these kinds of large language models are probably one of the first, in my view, one of the first kind of waves of AI models actually being democratized in terms of use by ordinary people who just may not have a background in tech, for example, where people can actually recognize that they are using AI models and they're using it in a way where they can probably really enhance their productivity in terms of getting answers to several kinds of questions that they may have professionally or personally, for example, where they can simulate, say, communicating normally as they would with any human being and kind of getting responses or getting information that directly kind of answers their question compared to, say, looking up something on Google or talking to some person who may or may not that kind of experience because these models are kind of trained on the knowledge of the world and tailored to give specific responses to human questions.
This is extremely fascinating because it also links with the work we do of coaching and mentoring teens and young adults, also guiding them through their next phase of life or in education or career. Now, your background is interesting because you're in the thick of things in terms of understanding these models, in terms of the tech part. And also, you said that you feel that these are really useful for even personal and professional growth. It's like having a mentor, which is a bot, who's kind of takes in information from so many sources of knowledge systems and then produces answers based on the intent of your question. This is really fascinating. So, from the techie part of it, like how do you see your journey, your background, and how did you really get interested in machine learning? You may or may not be directly involved in these generative AI tools development, but people you know who might be, what is it? What is it like a day job for them? What is it that they really have to do to get these models up and running?
Yeah, so for the first part of the question related to how I got interested, so after I came into college, I was a structural engineering major, and there's a backstory on how that happened. We probably discussed it in another one of our of the podcasts associated with Ed Brand. So I was pretty interested in math since high school, and I wanted something that also involved programming. And data science was a new major that was introduced when I was a freshman. Took a whole bunch of online courses, spoke to a lot of people, and ultimately decided to declare the major. And machine learning definitely seemed like a pretty up and coming field. And I was pretty glad to have an opportunity where I could specifically pursue my education, where a lot of the coursework would be very tailored to it. So I feel I was privileged enough to have an academic background in it in my undergrad. Coming to your second part of the question, related to what a day in the life looks like for people who may work on generative AI models or large language models, currently, I would say it may not be as well defined compared to a lot of the other places because large language models, even though they have existed for a bit of time, they probably haven't been operationalized in this kind of a real world sense as we are seeing right now with this wave, right? And generative AI is just one kind of concept within the whole umbrella of machine learning, which is still a very broad and diverse field. But if I had to guess an answer to, if I had to take a stab at answering this question, a lot of it probably involves taking these really large models, which are trained on the knowledge of the world, and seeing how we could fine tune them or how we could tailor them towards specific use cases. And this can be in a whole variety of industries, whether it be related to content writing, graphic designing, or even something like um, generating different kinds of instructions for different applications and kind of operating apps based on natural language input, or even say medical purposes, for example, in terms of prompting things or perhaps getting some kind of an assistant that can answer initial questions for you. So I think the initial work kind of involves how do you take these really large models and operationalize them to the real world and probably kind of put a variant of a model out in a way that is more tailored to serving specific use cases um, for specific applications. Feel it might feel like a really broad response, and I'm happy to kind of also follow up on this. But that's kind of the broad idea. Yeah.
Well, that actually gives a pretty good overview. You did mention in your work that ethics is also part of the sort of problem that you want to address through machine learning and AI. Some of the projects you might be involved in would want to factor that in. There's been a lot of discussion recently about biases and fairness of AI systems. How do you think we can address these issues?
Yeah, that's a very broad question. And quite
Mhm.
honestly, I personally believe the world still doesn't have very structured answers to these questions. But I think the world is starting to explore how to potentially approach these questions related to detecting issues or biases in models, or potentially mitigating any harm that might be that might be created with these models. One of the foundational ways of dealing with this is trying to see how your model is behaving and why it's potentially behaving the way it is. If I were to summarize this in one word, I would say something like explainability. For any given input, when a model provides an output, which could be a text response, which could be an image, any kind of machine learning task, probably identifying which part of the input to the model is the most impactful in terms of creating that output, or how is the model weighing different dimensions of the input, and how is it weighing those dimensions when it actually generates the output. And that's probably one initial step in terms of recognizing if there may be any biases in, say, anything related to gender, ethnicity, people living in certain geographical locations, things like that. So kind of seeing how your model is behaving and why it's behaving in the way it does gives more of an idea on how it's dealing with the input features and how to potentially balance out some of the behavior in the model, or how to potentially tweak some of the training data so that these models do not encode human biases.
Interesting. I think the first thing you managed to mention while defining it was that these models could essentially be looked at interfaces, which is pretty much it. Like you input stuff into it and it generates responses. And now different generative AI tools, including video and photographs and design and all of that, can obviously be outputs we can expect. Let's go say specific to education as a field, and how this could aid in sort of human development in terms of acquiring knowledge, using knowledge, the synthesis and collaboration, uh, that human computer interface that we've always been sort of so interested to know how that will eventually work. This seems to be a kind of a nudge towards that too. How do you think education can gain from such tools? And what are the challenges educators and institutions at large and administrators would have to sort of address in the current situation where it's also new, and then maybe in the long term?
Got it. So I guess I'm again kind of dividing this question into two parts. First, how this might be utilized in something like education. To address this, I believe one of the best real world scenarios that probably already exists in front of us is Khan Academy trying to integrate GPT-4 into their offering, where they're tailoring GPT-4 to act as a virtual tutor. And I think they're offering that feature as a preview, where students can try to ask questions to that virtual assistant, which is an AI pretty much, and try to ask them how to solve the problem. And that assistant wouldn't directly provide them answers to that problem, but would actually try to nudge them towards in the right direction, and try to actually take the input of what the student already knows, and then try to nudge them in terms of whether they're thinking about problems the right way. So it kind of acts as a tutor where it's trying to help the student figure things out and develop that thought process while still not providing them the answer, which seems like a really nice kind of initial way of democratizing personalized education for each student, regardless of financial status or regardless of where they're from. That's the first part of the question related to the application of education. Um, for the second part, related to what are some things that educators might need to keep in mind when it comes to using tools like these. Obviously, there have been a lot of discussions related to how students might use this to potentially do any of their homework assignments and things like that, and how to make sure that students are not losing out on a lot of the education, and that they're not just using these tools to essentially do their homework or do their tasks, right? So I think this has kind of also happened throughout history, where, say, initially when calculators were invented, a lot of people, say, protested, saying that students may not be able to develop initial foundational mathematical skills if they're just inputting numbers on the calculator and just getting all the mathematical answers. Over time, the education system kind of evolved to incorporate tools like calculators in exams or in concepts, for example, and try to deal with more higher level or more complicated problems. Similarly, with these kinds of tools, they can provide a pretty effective way of articulating some of the info related to answering certain human prompts. And then I guess over the longer term, having a kind of education system which ideally focuses on even more complicated challenges, potentially even novel challenges that the world may not even have solved yet, and so the AI wouldn't may not know about it. And then trying to see how students can then potentially use generative AI tools and other kinds of AI tools to aid them in terms of trying to bring disparate ideas together and trying to solve more complicated problems is probably the next evolution of education as we might know it. But then again, these are just guesses. We'll have to wait and watch.
Oh, it definitely gives a good framework. And so, if you were to then expand it to say other industries and something that you can just pick and choose, say that this is where it's already being applied. Khan Academy in education is a great example. Uh, have you heard of other such initiatives in other industries that could be worth mentioning?
Sure, yeah. So I think one of the examples could be Microsoft. And just bear in mind that everything I say here are just my personal views. But we recently saw that Microsoft had announced a feature across all of their Microsoft 365 apps called Copilot, where they kind of highlighted how across different documents, like different applications like Word, Excel, or PowerPoint, etc., people can actually use some of these generative AI tools to generate a whole bunch of text, summarize meeting notes in Teams, for example, or generate PowerPoint slides related to their user inputs or some of the ideas they have. And also kind of and they also showcased additional features related to say adding specific kinds of images or kind of adapting some of the generated content based on further user inputs or further prompts from the user. So that is one application which is related to productivity and defining the future of work. There can be a whole bunch of other applications as well, and I believe that companies are gradually starting to embrace some of these AI tools for their specific use cases as well.
So that's fascinating. Of course, Binge was just the beginning, and then you also have this Copilot. Is it accessible, or is it just at the beta phase?
Um, I'm not super clear on the details,
Yeah.
but I'm assuming that it might be initially available probably in some kind of a preview kind of
Hmm.
phase,
Sure.
and probably even only to enterprise customers. So we probably have to see when
Right.
it gets rolled out
Hmm.
to everyone.
Super. I think this kind of making the conversation a bit more broad-based, and we have so many new technologies, or the future of Web3 now, LLMs and generative AI models. What are the other big things in tech that you think we should be aware of, or people should start talking about soon, if any?
Big things in tech that people should start talking about. Um, I feel like generative AI is a good place to start because this probably seems the most closer to everyday people trying to wrap their heads around what AI actually is and how they can actually utilize it for personal purposes. I might also be biased because when generative AI came in, personal story, this was probably the first time my parents probably directly got to consciously know about AI tools that they could directly use and interface with. My mom reached out to me asking about how to use ChatGPT because it helped her friends generate cooking recipes, for example, just given an input of ingredients. My dad could use it to auto generate WhatsApp messages, for example, and just providing it the context to then just get a well structured message with all the connection glue around generating a well structured message for, say, specific WhatsApp chats and things. So, in terms of the things that people should start talking about, generative AI, I feel, is a good way to start because it doesn't require a whole lot of expertise in terms of onboarding to it. All it really requires is just being articulate in terms of the question that you want to ask in your own language or way, and trying to see how you can utilize these models in the best way to get whatever info you want as fast as possible. And this could be both personally with any questions you might have, any kinds of um, information you might want to seek from the web, but you may want a more direct answer to your question compared to search, or even professionally in terms of aiding it in your work and being more productive with it. So if people can start, say, gradually talking about it and things, that's probably like a good gateway drug, if you may, in terms of onboarding to this AI ecosystem and trying to develop a better understanding of how people can adapt with the latest AI technologies and actually embrace them in terms of just improving different aspects of their life.
This is fantastic. I think this is a great start to our new podcast series. And Talk to the Bot is what it's named. And I was actually looking at options online and I said, okay, let me maybe use ChatGPT to give me options. And I put in my keywords and there was a list of 20 I got and I chose this one. So it's, it's again a fantastic way to even name things and new projects. So thanks so much, Aditya. And thanks for taking the time and sharing experiences. As always, pleasure to have you on these sessions with me. Look forward to your future success and more such conversations.
Thank you for having me.